testing. So it looks like everyone at least tried. It did, I guess, between Jay and Devanshi and Ingrid. Did anyone finish this app or project? Yeah. Okay. So I had huge hopes of putting animations and stuff in this, and I ended up I didn't do it because I kind of ran out of a little bit of time. But the main part, that sort of the app does do is, let me just like kill it. Actually, so let's see. Let me just kill it all the way. All right. Okay, so let me just move. Okay, so I'm going to run the app first. So you notice that when it launches, it's asking for location. So I'm going to do like always using app, and then it tells me like when the sunset is and when is the sunrise. And it seems pretty simple. It did take a few steps. So let's just look at the code. Like any simple SwiftUI code, it has a content view, and the content view had that just a simple image that I was just showing you guys, and and the sunset and sunrise labels. And what I created was a view model. I mean, you could try to stick everything in here, especially if you're just doing a quick and dirty project, but it's always good practice to try to separate all the concerns. And I felt that with all the things that we need to do in this app, like getting the location and then making a network call, it's nice to put that in the view model. And basically, we just create the view model in this view. And the main first thing that you kind of notice is that there is this dot task, and it's like awaiting this view model get times. And this dot task is very handy. It used to, you can also kind of do it on a peer and then put all your asynchronous stuff in a task, but that kind of just this makes it, it's a synthetic sugar to, it's a good modifier to just make those two processes happen, that, at the time that the view loads, then it's going to do this, asynchronous task. So what does this view model get times do? And then before I go further, so as part of doing this, we had this, the idea was to use this async location kit. It's a third-party library that someone's written to kind of make the location finding follow the whole async await format. And it's very, very handy. And I was just curious on how, how you would use it. So that's why I kind of threw it in there. The other thing to know that when you are asking for location, one thing I noticed that when you create a SwiftUI app, by creating a new project and saying, you notice that there's no info plist here, which is, I think, almost like a little bug, because, usually you would have it. Though if you go to the project and you go to your target under info, you do see it here. And one thing you need to make sure that you're actually setting the location description for this. So let's see where so there's this privacy location when in use. If you don't have that description set, then when you try to run the whole location finding location manager, you will see an error here under the debug console asking you to set it. And that might have been an issue when you were trying this project because it says set it in your info plist, and then you're like, where's my info plist? And then, so that was like one of the gotchas if you were starting with this project. So the main thing was, I used a package manager to get this async location kit added to my project. It is also a pod, so you could use that too. And then, let's go to the view model. So here in the view model, you import your async location kit. We have, if you remember that we had that get times method, which is going to get our sunset and sunrise times. And the first thing, get times does. Now, in this case, we're just calling this once. If we were going to do this multiple times, we may want to do the permission thing separately, not in the get times method, because we want to just get the permission once and then deal with getting that specific, the user's current location. But right now I put it here, and you notice that, there is an async location manager property that I have that you set up. And right now I put best accuracy. There's good and bad things about best accuracy because it is a little more performance heavy. So depending on, if I'm right at Los Gatos in a specific location, or, in a more coarser location, it's not a big deal for this, project. If you're doing a running app or something, then obviously you want the best accuracy because you want to know exactly where you are in the path. But I just chose the best accuracy for now. And so you notice that, we have this async location manager, and we just request permission. And then when in usage, so when the app is, because that's the kind of permission that we want the user, so that when the app is actually being used, we want to get that a permission. Now, they could just say always, but at least we need that. So here's the interesting part. So when we call this, previously, if you had used the core location and tried to get the permissions, then you would have to have a callback. And then, as part of getting that permission, then you can do other things and then actually call, do the request location. But in this case, it just kind of all the other async awaits, it kind of pauses here, it's the main thread, it does other things while this is gonna pop the pop-up that we saw, because if it already had permission, then it would just come out of it right away. If it doesn't have permission, then it will pop that up, and if I say yes, then basically we're out of there. And then here, there is a do catch. I haven't done a good job of sort of doing the right thing if there is a issue with getting the location. But that's something I should fix. But here, the next part of this async part is that now we have async location manager requesting a location. And once it has a location, you get this. Now, this is not a specific coordinate. When you look at the GitHub for this, it looks a little misleading because you see this let coordinate equals to that, and you're like, oh, we already got a coordinate. And then you try to use it and it doesn't work. It ends up that this is like a location event, so that when you're you have to go and look and see, it's an enum, and what type of enum is it? If the locations were updated, then it would be this did update locations. Of course, if it's not that for whatever reason, we couldn't get a location or whatever, then it wouldn't be this. And then we'll basically be defaulted to saying, couldn't fetch location. But if, there is a updated locations, you're going to get an array of locations. That shouldn't be surprising because even in the traditional way we do location manager, you don't just get one location, you get an array. But usually there's like, if you're asked for just one location, that array will just have one location in there. In here, I check to make sure that there is one item in locations before now going, okay, so now I have my location. I can now call this fetch sunset, sunrise times and pass the latitude and longitude there. And here in my view model, I just put the fetching in the view model. Now, if this is kind of a bigger app, you're not going to put the specific network logic and into the view model. You're going to have a separate class that's like your service that you're going to call. That's basically the view model calls this on the service. But in this kind of a small app where we're just kind of illustrating how this works, it's fine to just implement it here. And, notice that we get a latitude, we get a longitude. And again, it's async. We have to, if I didn't put async, if it's calling here things that you have to kind of wait, then it will, it won't compile and it will ask you to put the async here. And if there is like any sort of error that gets thrown, then you have to also put the throws in there. So far, any questions? Because I kind of went quickly. Because I know some folks were trying this. Did you run into any, did you get to this point, or did any of these steps is where you got stuck? And let me see, I see some chat. Oh, Jay, true, that was confusing when I mentioned coordinate. Yeah, so Jay ran into this. We saying MVVM, yeah, I was thinking simple one. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so the next part is that we have this URL, and I specifically picked this API because it's very simple. You're just passing latitude and longitude. And then I fuss around with, I'll explain why I'm putting this formatted equals 0 here. And I wanted to kind of play with that now. I think since iOS 15, URL session now supports async await. So you can, basically do your URL session, share data. But at that point, it just, again, waits until you get the data back. And then this one, you can also, in this case, if it can't, there's some network issue or whatever, it will just throw an error. And you can try to get the description of the error and, do the appropriate thing. But the nice thing about it, that this really, really simplifies, because before, if you recall, for most of these networking things, we call the network, then we have a closure, our callback to be called, and then, we're getting the response from that. But in this case, you're just basically calling this. And when the data, or if the error didn't happen, then you're going to have the data. And here, then I'm basically going to parse out the data. So I'm using something that most of you probably have done, the JSON decoder, where I'm decoding. And then I quickly just did a quick, model of the sunset sunrise model, where, I looked at the results of the API, and basically, there is a key called results, and inside of that, you have the information for the sunrise and sunset. So I only needed sunrise and sunset. So that's the two things that I'm kind of grabbing and decoding. So let's go back to here. So when it's like decoding this, this is what it's doing here. So I get the output and then I want the results one. I could have had a wrapper there so that, I didn't have to explicitly do the dot results, but that works. So at that point, notice that, this method just returns the info, which is what I need to do the further operations. In a more traditional thing, we would have had a closure here, a completion closure, and then we would have like decoded all the stuff, and then had that closure go and set things. In here, you're just getting the result, which is a really nice thing about async await, because it just makes it very clear what the return type is, rather than having this whole thing in the closure where a bunch of things happen. And it's not very clear always what's the returning result. So I really like that. So if we go back here, we did, call fetch sunset times, and we got this info. And one thing I noticed with this API was by default, it returns the times in UTC, which looks really weird. Like if you're like running this in California and you're like, ooh, like sunrise is at 1 a.m. It seems weird. So what you want to do, there is a way to tell it not to just give you that specific time string. If you pass this formatted equals 0, then it gives you this ISO format for the date, which basically has like, the year, month, day, and then a time format there. And the nice thing about that is if we get that, then we know how to like, I can get the date from that string, because I'm just using this local ISO formatter. So the local ISO formatter is really the ISO 8601 date formatter that I just set once in my view model, in case I have to make multiple calls to this. I don't create the formatter over and over again. So I have the formatter, then I'm passing the string, then I get the date. Basically, yeah, I get the date here. And then I'm just like setting my sunset time and sunrise time to those dates, formatted. And I just use the default formatting, but you can change it to whichever format you want at that point. But it's in your local date. And the interesting thing is that the sunset and sunrise times are published. So, so that when you go to your content view, then, if this view model, sunset time and sunrise time changes, initially notice that it was just empty string. But once it's set to a new value, then because we're kind of observing those fields, then in your content view, that will update. And that's kind of what we saw when we were doing this. So it just goes so quick that right away it goes and fetch. And notice this time I didn't get the pop-up for the location because the permission's already set. So that thing returns right away. And then we can just request the location. Yeah. And basically we can display this. Now it would be nice as a, just also to get a little into SwiftUI animation, to have this, once we get the times, you can kind of animate the sun, going up and down and then showing the times. You can do something cooler with this than just a boring image and that. But I think the idea with the project was just to get you comfortable with how would I make a network call if I am using async and await. And, and because now Apple kind of supports that and gives it to you, you don't have to do anything extra. the async location thing is something that Apple till now hasn't given us a async await way to access location. Hopefully they will soon, because I think it's a great idea. So if you wanted to do that and simplify some of the logic in your app, then you would use this async location. Good. And let's see if anyone has any questions, kind of through this quickly. Any questions? Are there any unit tests? That's a good question. So here's the thing. I think when you're doing these kind of unit tests for the view model, the whole that's because usually for networking call, we kind of mock the results. So it's not really doing a real networking call, like we're sort of mocking the response back. Imagine, so usually when, I've done unit tests, it doesn't actually get to the part where it's doing this whole, URL session thing at that point. Like before that, it will just, if it's mocked, it just returns you the response. Otherwise, so we're really just testing this and making sure if there is a real response, can we return it? Otherwise, are we throwing proper errors for different kinds of, if the URL is incorrect, or, we can fake network error. So it's interesting, like if you wanted to unit test that, how that, depending on what, if the URL is valid, then you're just checking the response for it. Yeah, so I don't know what's a good way if we were truly testing, but it does bring a good question for other things where it's kind of asynchronous, with unit tests, that when we do asynchronous test, that we have this expectation of a value, and we kind of wait for a little bit and then see if the value gets set. So I can see, like, you would like take a little, even if you were mocking the network thing, when you're making the call for fetch sunset time, you're, putting an expectation that you would, have this value set at a certain time, and then make sure that it was set otherwise. And then also, if it isn't, then you return an assert. Yeah, so you're testing how your code responds to different, I mean, mainly for those kind of things, you're sort of mimicking what would be the different kind of responses, and is the rest, are we, if those events happen, are we able to get those errors back from the call and do the right thing after. But those are always a little tricky to do correctly. But, it is a lot of trust in Apple to make sure that, because this really, like, it makes it very simple to make these calls, asynchronous calls, and you just trusting Apple to know that, it takes these requests, puts it in the right thread pool, does the right thing. Now notice that, in here, it was kind of a small thing that all this was in this task. If you have it in other piece of code that's mostly synchronous, and then you're doing an async thing, you have to make sure you put it in a task enclosure. Otherwise it will complain and not be able to do it, because you kind of have to sort of message iOS that you will be doing this asynchronous thing, in the middle of a synchronous call. So it just happens that for SwiftUI, especially if it's something that you're just, gonna do at the time that, the view is loading, then this is an easy way of messaging that and making that happen. If there were things in your view model that was doing other asynchronous thing, then you had to put that task enclosure there for parts of it. The other thing, I think here, I put a main actor, because when you notice here, we're actually setting our properties that is used, that's observed and set in the UI. If I didn't put that, so let me actually take that off, and then let's see what happens. You will see it kind of says, publishing changes from background threads is not allowed. Make sure to publish values from the main thread. It's a warning. It actually still allows me to do it. But that's something that, and we kind of talked about it in the book, that there's different ways. You could do it for the entire method. You could do it for the portion, a certain area where you're going to be setting it. I was kind of lazy and did it for the whole entire method, but that basically says that at the time that you get the result from the async await, you have to, iOS makes sure that you're in the main thread. You don't have to, in the old closure way, you would just do the dispatch main queue and make sure that you were in the main queue when you were doing whatever operation that you needed to do. But here, the way you do it is by setting this specific kind of annotation to say that, okay, for this particular call, when it comes out of these awaits, it should be in the main thread. Otherwise, you will get some weird results, even though it complains, and then, because this could be in a separate thread, and then it's, SwiftUI is trying to update, and it would be in, it will get that updated result in potentially not in the main thread. Bad things could happen. So it's prudent to always make sure that you are, it kind of does warn you, and to, take the necessary action and make sure that you're specifying that it should be in the main thread. Any other questions? So I would, I'll push this to our GitHub so you can take a look. One thing you could do is take this and fork it and try some other version, or update it in any way you want. Just play around with it just to get a sense for it. If I have time, I might do more, especially in the UI. I think the rest of it's okay for what it's doing, but yeah, it would be nice to, and then some better error handling. As I said, I'm kind of catching things here and not really setting the right errors and stuff. And that's, for a POC that you're quickly showing, that's okay. But for, production code, you don't want to do that. All right. We're good with that. Then Navati, do you want to take over?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Thanks. Thanks again, Monika. This was such a big milestone. 16 sessions.
Yeah. Not enough time. I think honestly, you learn when you actually have to, in your own work, or whether it's a hobby app or you're actually working on some production app, if you're actually using combine or async await, very quickly you'll reference this book, you'll look at other things to learn, right? If it's just kind of oh, well, I'm just to increase my knowledge, you learn a bit, but it's not the same as doing a hands-on, learning where you're actually doing it. You have to make it work. So, but it's still nice to read technical books and sort of open up your horizons, especially if you could do some of the sample code, and because it just kind of at least makes you familiar with the concept. And then if later you're just, you need to do it at least, or someone else talks about it, it's not so foreign to you. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, this is, yeah, I mean, we are really grateful. I know there were folks who wanted to join today. But yeah, like there are certain circumstances, you know, one of them is
If
really
they're
big.
always, and that's why it gets recorded, and you know,
Yeah.
it'll be in GitHub so everyone
Yeah.
can try.
Yeah.
That learning doesn't, you know, stop at the end of the session. So.
Exactly. I mean, I know I'm going to be revisiting some of these videos, and you know, I'm so glad you've recorded them, and I'm really, really grateful for this. Even Devanshi, who's here, she's you know, been keeping up with the content, with the recordings. Usually doesn't work for her time zone, but she's especially come for the last session here. So yeah, I mean, this was a major thing you've done for us. Really appreciate it.
No, this
And
was great, and I'm sure we'll, you know, we'll pick another book very soon, and then do this all over again. So some other concept, yeah.
yeah, and yeah, it's really inspiring. Like, you know, I'd love to do something like this sometime after getting a little breather. But
Yes.
yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, so I'll stop recording here.